Welcome back, rugby fans, of course, to the Rugby Debate Show. We put ourselves and our guests to the test. This is, of course, the Rugby Rant podcast show, and my name is Ty Braga, your host for today's activities, alongside Rob, the Hammer Hammerschmidt, Scott, the Big Guy Ferrara, and more importantly, taking them on here in this Rugby Debate episode, we have Phil from Jack's Rangers podcast, the eternal Free Jacks supporter, fan, super fan, whatever you'd like to call him. Let's welcome him to the show. Phil, welcome aboard.
Huzzah, gents. Let's get it.
I love it. Every time. Huzzah. I forgot that. Yeah, I love it. I love it, man. I love it. So Phil has, of course, if you don't know, already got a very successful podcast of his own. We brought in some professional competition here today, so to speak, to be able to take on Rob and Scott in this familiar format of the Rugby Debate. Now, if you're not familiar with how it works, a quick reminder for our fans. These gentlemen are going to debate against one another in the hopes of becoming out the victor. How can they do so? Well, they get to be able to have 2 minutes each to be able to rant the topics at hand, of which I'll share in a moment. However, should they go over their 2 minutes, they'll be given what we like to refer to as the cheese. That is their first warning. Continue to infringe, and they'll be promoted to the red. That means they'll be out for the next round and essentially disqualified, as we have yet to see anybody come back from that type of card situation. However, what are they going to be ranting about today? Well, we have two topics in mind. The first of which is to discuss the impact, the surroundings, and what led to the cancellation of the Las Vegas Cup, which of course was scheduled to be competition against USA Eagles and Ireland. However, this was recently canceled. This was happening this month in October by the time this releases, right? So only just around the corner. So each one of them is going to be given the opportunity to rant about this topic, tell us the good, tell us whether it was merited, tell us why they think so, whatever that may be. And the first person to share his thoughts will be Phil. Phil, take the floor.
All right, gents. So it's a bit unlucky, right, with the COVID travel restrictions that both union bosses' heads have explained to us as why the event was canceled. Could it have been high ticket prices and not a lot of turnout also a factor? I mean, that's speculation, right, that you hear on the internet. But I'm going to throw it this way. Is that really an event that, the average fan would want to go see after we got our butts kicked against Ireland a couple months back by 60 points? It's not – Las Vegas is always a good time, right? But for me as a rugby fan, I wasn't going to go to that trip. So I'm not surprised that it was canceled. And I want to throw this out to you guys just as a side note real quick. Do you think it would have been better if USA played the curtain riser for that event, and it would have been, let's say, New Zealand and Ireland? This format has been used in the past, right? So just to throw this out as a possibility, why didn't they lead with that, with an event in Las Vegas, and then USA could have played, let's say, like the Maori or the reserves of Ireland, the Ireland A side, as the curtain riser? That would have been more interesting to me because it would have been more competitive to begin with. So I just wanted to throw that out as a possibility to discuss as well. But ultimately, it's unlucky, right? We're living in a COVID world, and that's just one more sports casualty to add to the list. But it seems like it might have been a little bit more than that, ultimately.
Right, and you may very well be right. And if the rumors have any truth to them that are out there, I mean, what people have thrown out on social media, you want to kind of, you want to glance at it, but you don't want to take it too much, into it. Take everything with a pinch of salt. It's social media, right? It's pretty low threshold to be involved in that. However, that being said, some of the rumors that have been thrown out, enough tickets weren't sold, it was the wrong timing, and the list can go on. And you kind of address that to a certain point, and maybe there is some merit to it. We don't know for sure. But I do like your idea that if you were to be able to do it over, how else could it have been done? Well, maybe you're right. Maybe if the point was that enough tickets weren't sold, and we don't know for sure, but hypothetically, let's say that was one of the reasons. How could we have avoided that? Well, create a greater attraction. Maybe you're right. Maybe if it was Ireland versus New Zealand on foreign territory like this, you would have enough support. Certainly when it comes to the general fan in the US, they know the caliber of New Zealand. If they know a team, it's most likely New Zealand. And with the heritage of the Irish in the US, you think that people would most likely support that too, and it would be a great matchup. So yes, I do see a value in that if your goal is to sell tickets, right? But if your goal is to be able to promote an opportunity for the USA to play at a higher level of competition, then we might be losing in that regard. So it depends on what the priority of this really was. And without knowing it, we have to be able to just fall back on our assumptions. But I think those are pretty fair ones from Phil. And let's hand it over to Scott to hear what he thinks.
Let's get hot, baby. This is ridiculous. This is so embarrassing for USAR, coming off of Chapter 11, coming off of disappointing internationals. I mean, how could you, as you knew COVID was a thing, you knew these travel restrictions were a thing, you knew you're hard pressed to get fans from outside the country at this point. So to hedge your bet just to say that we were going to get all these Irish fans to buy these tickets, and the Irish come and they do watch their team, and they do watch them in the States. I mean, I was there for the one in Red Bull, and Red Bull is only 25,000 people, but it was hard to get a ticket. I got a ticket the first hour they went open, and then they were sold out, and then it was hard to get tickets on resale. The resale value went up like 300% on a USA versus Ireland match. It was a very hard ticket to get. So, I think they could have sold out the stadium really well, but how you, as USAR, how do you really hedge your bet to say, oh, the COVID's going to end and the restrictions are going to stop and and then, you're going through it and Delta variant hits, and I just don't know, like, what the frig were you guys thinking up front to do that? I mean, if you were forecasting and they said this in the press release, they were forecasting the Irish fans to come across the pond to buy these tickets. So if you knew that this could have been an issue, put it in a stadium like Red Bull, and then we would just probably still would have sold 15,000 to 20,000 of just American fans and Irish expats that are there. You know what I mean? So I understand what they were trying to do by putting it in the Death Star, which is what they call the stadium, Allegiant Stadium. And I just don't understand why you bet that COVID restrictions were going to be lifted. It's just
right. I mean, it's a pretty large bet to wager with a lot to risk, right? And yeah, there is such a thing as acceptable risk. And the question is, was it an acceptable risk? And I think to your point, Scott, you don't feel it was. I mean, you feel like the odds were stacked against you and you gambled and you lost, right? But this kind of seems like you're playing the greatest hits of the USA Rugby on the back of the bankruptcy, on back of this kind of like.
And that's the thing is, you have all these USA Rugby fans who pay their dues and then don't get anything from USAR outside of playing for their club teams, right? And then they go and they put their money in to go watch this match and travel and go to Vegas and take time off of work, and you just absolutely screwed them because you bet the COVID restrictions were going to be lifted earlier. I think it's unacceptable.
Right. So then you're kind of going into another area, which is what is your responsibility as USA Rugby to the fan? So you could open up a whole can of worms there. So let's just dwell on that just for a fraction of a moment, as I re-explain, and maybe it isn't obvious to all of our viewers who are tuning in. The Las Vegas Cup was planned to be the first of many, right? Now, they do hope to be able to see this being a postponement and not a cancellation. They do hope to be able to revisit this very same concept for 2022 at the same stadium. That stadium is Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas. Beautiful stadium. I didn't know it was referred to as the Death Star, though, but of course is normally home to the Raiders. So this is a top quality venue for the first time hosting an international rugby match. There's a win there. So the publicity behind it was great. The story they were sharing was wonderful. And we were all buying the story, right? Until we got closer and closer and started seeing less and less information. And the whispers started to become a little bit louder that there was a problem brewing. And that problem eventually led to the cancellation of this matchup because of the travel restrictions impeding Ireland coming to the US and competing. So that is the basis of their cancellation. And to Scott's point, you knew this was going to be a challenge, but you still went ahead. So you kind of you overlooked your responsibility to fans, right? You overlooked the obvious risks. And if I understand you correctly, Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, that's the gist of your rant, right?
Absolutely. It just that was a risk that I felt wasn't worth taking.
Right. So let's hand it over to Rob Hammerschmidt to share his thoughts.
Yeah, so the COVID restrictions, unlucky or coincidence? I don't know. I guess what I'm saying there is it a
convenient exit,
convenient excuse?
Yeah.
Right? Because there weren't that many ticket sales. I guess I'm going that direction for a couple of reasons. Number one, was too much expected from the USA Rugby fan. Right? I mean, think of what we're talking about. We're talking about this match. We're talking about DC, in which the All Blacks and the U.S. are going to be playing. And then we're also, don't forget, there's a Rugby World Cup qualifier happening in Rugby Town October 2nd.
Right,
correct?
Against Uruguay.
Right, against Uruguay. Those are 3 international matches here on home soil, and we're expecting USA Rugby fans to go all 3 and try to sell those out. Not very likely. I mean, the only chance I had is to get the wife to agree to go to Vegas to have a good time and then go out and gamble a bit and then go out and, oh yeah, there's a rugby match. Do you want to go? Right? So it's a tough ask. I think the other thing is there's this kind of mystique about Vegas that, if you have it there, people will come. Well, guys, the only thing that's been successful in Vegas rugby-wise has been the sevens. Right, the Vegas Sevens. And they haven't done that for a couple years. And does the Sevens atmosphere translate to the 15s atmosphere? Sevens is a very festival style. People come and go. They go in and out. It's a multi-day affair. It's a party event similar to Las Vegas style, right? But a one-off event like this doesn't translate. MLR certainly wasn't able to reproduce it in 2020. Weren't able to reproduce it with San Diego in 2021. And now we have this failed event that, it like Scott said, we rarely agree on things, but we agree on this. It is an embarrassment. And then does it put too much financial pressure on USAR, right, to promote both events, to get alumni, to get donors to both events and try to raise money for USA Rugby? I just think it was too much to ask. And it was a non-starter from the get-go, having all these events playing in November.
Right. I think, okay, so I want to rewind to one of your original points there, it was just too much USA Rugby in a short window. And if we go even farther back, so obviously there's Uruguay in the same month, a part of the qualifiers for 2023. But even before that, through September, we had the Canadian internationals that were playing. One, of course, was in Glendale as well. So you've already had this ramp up. You've already had people who spent money. You've already had people who traveled. I personally was at the Glendale leg for Canada versus USA, and it was a sellout audience. Now, obviously, it's a much, 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 much smaller stadium, but those fans still traveled from other parts of the nation to be able to buy a flight, pay money for a hotel, and all of the things that come associated to it. So can they do the same thing a month later? Probably not. So count half of your, say 4,000 people out there, potentially as high as that. And so the same thing happens when you add Uruguay, when you add these other things. And maybe they were forced to choose between New Zealand matchup and the Irish matchup because they got to only pick one. Because then the following month, you've got the November International as well. So there's a lot going on. And while we are proud and happy to be able to see this type of rugby coming to American soil, is it too much of an ask for where the rugby market is right now? And, we can't answer that question. But another point I wanted to address from Rob's side is this a convenient excuse that COVID has now presented us and, kind of pushed us back into a corner? And to Scott's point there, well, this is no surprise. We've been coming across these challenges for the last nearly 2 years. Why is this suddenly a surprise? And what was your backup, right? And how much money and resources have you already committed before you got to this point, right? Is this now just all money down the drain? Who knows, right? But before we dive into the open discussion component of this, we need to be able to take a moment to be able to thank one of our partners who help us do what we do here on the Rugby Rant podcast show. One of those is Can I Brands. Can I Brands is certainly one of those wonderful alternatives to prescription drugs that is non-habit forming. This CBD plant-based product will help you mend, heal, revitalize, refresh, and also sleep if that's what you need. They've got something to be able to help you through every moment of the day. You can go and check them out on canibrands.com for a full product line. And again, these products are no THC, CBD, vegan products that are really there to design to keep you healthy and fresh. And we encourage the use of these because I myself, and I know my colleagues, have enjoyed all of their products that they have shared with us. And we want you to be able to do the same. So you can go and check them out, canibrands.com, using the promo code 25 for an additional 25% off any of their products available on canibrands.com. Anything you put in the cart will be 25% off. So not just one item, everything in the cart. And once that exceeds $49 in a single purchase, you'll also get free shipping anywhere in the continental US that they ship to. I personally enjoy the Canai Boost with a little bit of a caffeine kick to get that extra pep in your step. And I know Rob will agree with me, is the Canai Fresh. Whether you prefer 100%. the spray or the dropper, they're both good options to enjoy Canai Brands. And again, that's canibrands.com using the code RANT25 for the additional 25% off. Thank you for that opportunity, and we draw our attention back to the matter at hand. Open floor, gentlemen, fire away.
Well, here's the thing. I'm going to disagree with Rob on his point where I think he's a little off base on they're trying to get the Sevens atmosphere, because it isn't, an all-day event. It isn't a multiple-day event. I think what they were trying to do is they're trying to get rugby into the most state-of-the-art stadium essentially in the world. Which is Allegiant Stadium right now. And I think the reason they picked Vegas is because it's a big international destination, and they thought the Irish would travel to this international destination. I'm not to disparage people, but I don't. If it was in Des Moines, I don't think the Irish would be getting there. There's no direct international flights from Dublin to Des Moines.
Hey, that's a
well, he's
absolutely.
He's very
for no reason.
I gotta take the shot on the Free Jacks here, but I'm saying so. I think that portion of your thinking was a little off base. I think it was more international travel destination in a brand new stadium.
Well, I don't disagree with any of those points. Mm-hmm. What I was saying is they always try to recapture, of rugby events in Vegas because the Rugby Sevens has been a very, very successful, Las Vegas Sevens, a very, very successful event, but they've never been able to repeat that outside of, within the 15s game. And I think that's because it's a different atmosphere for those two events.
I think it's a different seven too.
I think, but I think if you take the Soldier Field event,
Vegas lends itself better to that Sevens festival party style that's more typical.
You're correct if you're holding the tournament over a couple of days. I think if you're trying to hit that All Blacks Soldier Field vibe, you can get that in Vegas. And you mentioned the San Diego going to Vegas. San Diego was going to Vegas because of COVID, and then unfortunately they got screwed by the towns in Vegas because the three fields they were going to use all got shut out as testing sites. And honestly, to go back to 2020, it was just one of those things where it was kind of sprung on us on the MLR side on the schedules that these matches were going to happen there in lieu of having all aways and all homes for the Free Jacks and for Rooney. And I think it was just kind of short notice to get those tickets. So I just think they can get there and they can get the magic in Vegas, but hedging your bet to say the COVID restrictions were going to be off to get the Irish over here was the biggest mistake.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Phil, one of the biggest criticisms, and I want you to be able to answer this one, is that they should never have picked a stadium that size. We touched on it a couple of times here, but yet, like Scott pointed out, how great it is for rugby to be shown on one of the greatest stages available for sports in America, because it is recognized as one of the greatest stadiums. So by extension, it's kind of what happened with the Giltinis when they played at SoFi Stadium. There was like a sense of extra credibility given to the event, and that's why they also chose the Coliseum. So do you think there's merit in saying that's why they chose that stadium? That's why it was Vegas?
Yeah, perhaps, but ultimately, if you're not going to sell out, you're just going to see a lot of space of empty seats. And is that really great marketing on TV to see people that are not showing up to these events? I mean, ultimately, what is it? It's a pro football stadium, so it's at least 60,000 seats in there, right? Yeah. So I think Scott had a point. I hate to throw this praise at him because he's a Rooney fan, but he was talking about Red Bull, and that's something that they've used previously as a stadium, Red Bull Stadium there in New Jersey, very close to New York, right? Newark International right there. So it probably should have been held there. You would probably get a sellout. It's closer in terms of the Irish fans coming over, in terms of travel. East Coast, Irish descent. Mm-hmm. I mean, it would have made 1,000 more times, sense to have it there than in Las Vegas at a stadium that was not going to be sold out.
I get what you're saying, because they're playing basically.
For clarification, Allegiant Stadium is 65 when they have the soccer field in use.
Yeah. And I think to Phil and Scott's point, let me ask this: Scott, you were there in New Jersey. The Irish fans was pretty strong contingent.
The Irish fans was a strong contingent, but there was the USA fans were rocking it. I'll put it this way: I had tickets, and unbeknownst to me, they were obstructed view. And when I asked if I could be moved, the only tickets they could exchange were upper deck tickets. Yeah. And to be honest, they were handicapped accessible tickets that didn't sell. So I'm saying they didn't even give me a seat in the upper deck. They gave me a folding chair on a landing in the upper deck because that's how competitive tickets were.
That's a VIP experience, eh?
So my point is, when I went to the game here with the All Blacks and Ireland, I mean, there were the Irish contingent was huge.
By here, you mean Soldier Stadium
here
in Chicago,
Field,
for those that are listening. Yeah.
But what I'm getting at is that there was a huge American contingent that were supporting Ireland too, and that's because we know that Chicago is a home to a lot of Irish Americans, as is the East Coast. Boston, up there where Phil's at, and of course in New York where Scott's at, and so I think,
and that's why I see the appeal of having strong, ties to Ireland.
Think about this: Las Vegas isn't really known for its Irish contingent. I mean, most everybody goes there is somebody that's a visitor, right? Are you going to draw it?
But my point is, Irish fans travel, right? We talk about the Lions; they travel every 4 years with the Lions tour. So I don't think
that's a Lions tour. You can't compare that.
Yeah,
but my point is, if you look at the amount of Irish fans that come to the States to watch Ireland play, I watched Munster play USA in Rensselaer Field in Connecticut. There's a huge contingent of Munster fans who hopped across the pond to watch them play the Eagles in a game that doesn't mean anything. So my point is, if they're coming to watch their provincial team, they're going to come watch their national team. Again, I just think you can't, in the time of COVID, you can't hedge the bet. I think they would have filled the stadium well if the Irish fans were going there. And I don't think it has to do with the population of Irish in the area, because Vegas is just an international destination.
So if we have to look back on the evidence, and I'm going to tie it back to you in a moment, Rob. So if we had to look back at the evidence and we ask ourselves, okay, here's a 65,000-seater stadium when it's using a rugby-sized pitch, approximately from what Scott had shared a moment ago. But the on-record attendance is somewhere in the ballpark of only 26,000 when it was in Chicago the last time around, right? So how do you expect to be able to get more than double that when it's only a few years later and in a completely different area? That expectation, I think, was almost unrealistic from the start. And
I'm
Rob,
not sure.
I'm going to throw it to Rob because I know he had something you wanted to share just beforehand, and he was also there.
Right, and I think it is unrealistic. I guess I would say look at the Ireland-Italy game here at Soldier Field. You had three matches all in one day, and I think they sold 26,000 tickets, which isn't bad, but it doesn't fill a 60,000-seat stadium at Soldier Field, right? I think what really built and sold out the match there at Soldier Field in what it was at 2018, it was 2016, was the fact that you had two heavy hitters. Right, and the fact that a lot of Irish Americans turned into Irish fans inside that stadium. And I'm not saying Ireland didn't travel well; they do, but still, you draw a lot of Irish Americans into that.
Right, but here's the thing. I think what we're not thinking about is because they're trying to hedge their bet on this COVID restrictions. They were thinking the Irish haven't been able to travel anywhere in 2 years, so. If they're gonna make travel plans, why not be in Vegas for an Ireland USA rugby match? They didn't say who the curtain raiser was going to be. I'm sure they would have had a curtain raiser. So I mean, I think again they were hedging their bet on this is going to be the first trip the Irish contingent can really travel to across the pond, right? And after COVID, they've been stuck in their houses on lockdown for X amount of months. So I think that's what they were doing. And I think if you hit it right, it's a home run. But this is like. Not even swinging on strike three. This is striking
but that's like betting on a horse that has 400 to 1 odds. If it comes in, you're rich. If not, you're just a stupid bet.
Yeah. So I think it's more of that. I think you can get that, but by the parameters that they had. But again, struck out looking.
It's just poor planning. Ultimately, the best way to sum it up is just poor planning.
Well, I agree there. So the question is, was it set up for success from the start, or was it set up for failure? Let's go once around the table to be able to hear our final thoughts. We start with the final thought from Phil.
Yeah, it's just poor planning. I don't think it was managed well, but it was USA Rugby a part of it, so I'm not necessarily surprised. I mean, I'm a proud American, but the organization is coming out of bankruptcy, poor management to get into that situation, and then they're throwing money into a risk ultimately. I mean, everything is calculated risk, but it didn't look good. ultimately, it seems unlucky, but there was also some poor planning on their part, unfortunately.
Fair enough. Scott, share your thoughts.
I don't think it was set up to fail. I think it was more of a risk-reward situation, and I think they got that portion wrong, and it's an embarrassment.
All right. Stern words, firm on your stance. I like it. Rob Hammerschmidt.
Given the bankruptcy, Phil mentioned it, USAR needs to hit a home run, and I just don't think this was the venue and this was the opportunity, nor the team to invite to hit that home run. If they would have just focused their energies on Washington, D.C. and New Zealand, do one event, do it right, do it well, hit the home run, and then think about how you can start to build and develop other events later on down the road.
Right. So just get it right the first time. You'll learn the formula, and from there you build. You know what, gentlemen? I think that it's been a fair rant, and I think that you've all shared great points of view, a little bit differing, but for the most part, we all agreed that it was just too much of an ask under the conditions and under the current climate that we are still very much in the middle of. And Ireland, who is particularly harder hit right now with even more strict travel restrictions and bans under the COVID climate. So, yeah, perhaps it was set up for success in principle, but in practice, it just fell short in many, many areas. And while we don't ill wish any USA Rugby ventures, we think they might have just bit off a little bit more than they could chew on this particular occasion, given that there are a lot of commitments for USA Rugby, and fans, they're just being asked too much of them right now. Well, let's take the opportunity to be able to step away from this rant just for a moment as we hear a few words from one of our partners here on the Rugby Rant.
Tighthead Brewing Company is Chicago's premier location to watch rugby and enjoy quality ales and lagers for all seasons. Located in Mundelein, Illinois, and the heart of Lake County, owner Bruce Duer and the Tighthead staff will ensure you are kept well hydrated so you don't miss a single scrum. Come to Tighthead and celebrate the 10-year anniversary of this wonderful establishment and the making of some wonderful handcrafted brews with Bruce and his staff. You won't regret it. Because Tighthead's Tap Room is like the familiar rugby clubhouse in which friends and teammates can meet, socialize, and enjoy a wide variety of brews on tap. And there's a lot of rugby to enjoy coming this fall. We have the Women's Rugby World Cup, we have the HSBC Sevens, we have the PR Sevens, we have Autumn Internationals in both October and in November. Lots of rugby on tap, lots of beers to enjoy. So hey, Chicago, when you want rugby, Tighthead Brewing Company will satisfy your thirst. Tighthead, it's worth more than a try.
And I'd like to be able to take the opportunity to be able to share one of our special partners who is truly giving back to rugby. And that is so important for us here on the Rugby Rant that we help grow rugby one fan at a time. These guys are taking one step further from Rugby Coffee, and they are helping rugby grow through youth development. Every cup that you enjoy from Rugby Coffee, 10% of the proceeds are being given back to developing youth rugby programs across Canada and the US. What better reason do you need to be able to enjoy a cup of coffee? This ethically sourced coffee, 2 North American brands have been developed by these guys. One is the crowd favorite. This is easily to enjoy by everybody. And then the second, a little darker, bit of a more bold blend is the Jouet. Whatever your preference may be, grab a bag of this from rugbycoffee.com. And remember, this ethically sourced coffee brand is giving 10% of their profits annually back to growing rugby. And what reason do you need to be able to enjoy rugby and coffee together than that alone? So make sure that you go and check them out at rugbycoffee.com, our partners here on the Rugby Rant podcast show. We enjoy it. You should too. And we're back, rugby fans. Of course, this is the show where we put ourselves and our guests to the test in this debate format here on the Rugby Rant podcast show. And as is tradition, we need to be able to crown a winner of this rant. And what was it about? Well, we were talking about the Las Vegas Cup, the cancellation, and the rumors that surrounded, and what do we speculate was some of the reasons. And it was an interesting debate. Ultimately, it seems that we were all on a very similar page, that USA Rugby might have bit off a little bit more than they could chew. The expectation was a little high, and they certainly underdelivered. Maybe maybe some of the rumors were true that tickets sales were low, or maybe it was just too much happening for the rugby fan to get involved with on the back of other internationals and following internationals with New Zealand in DC. So all of these could have been a factor. Maybe it was one, maybe it was none. But we are here to crown a winner. And on this occasion, for this particular round, I give it to Rob Hammerschmidt.
Yeah. He made no good points.
Hey, Phil, as long as it wasn't the big guy, we're happy, my friend.
As a matter of fact, he agreed with me on all my points. So he just took my points.
Okay, yeah. But you said Des Moines sucks.
Yeah, that's right.
I didn't say Des Moines sucks. I just said the Irish aren't going to travel there for an international test match.
I think Scott is producing some sour grapes for that wine.
I think Scott's going to edit this episode and make sure he's the winner.
Hey, just don't piss off John Cullen when he comes on next week, because he's from Des Moines too, and I'm pretty sure he could kick all 4 of our asses at one time.
For sure. Amen. But as is tradition, we like to be able to also throw the mic over to our guest. So, Phil, you've been a great sport. You've been a great competitor. This round wasn't yours. However, we like to be able to give the mic to you to be able to send a few shout outs to anybody important, maybe a special cause you'd like to draw attention to, or tell fans how they can tune in to Jack's Rangers.
Cool. Thanks, Ty. I love your jersey there, my friend. Looking good. Looking sharp. So, yeah, I do a little podcast called the Jack's Ranger Show. We are 17 episodes in, guys. I think when I first came on, we were like 2 or 3. So, yeah, we just keep on rolling, man. At episode 14, I was like, well, this is the last episode of the season, but I was just short-sighted. I couldn't stay away, right? So we've got all the off-season stuff going on right now. Player interviews are coming up because we're announcing with the Free Jacks here, some signings for the new season coming up. So just want to give a shout out to the podcast that I do, Jack's Rangers. You can find us on jacksrangers.com. Also, the First Regiment. So there's a really cool thing going on in Fort Quincy there, which is behind me. We are officially starting an unofficial supporters group called the First Regiment. So all of the hardcore Free Jack fans out there, all the Rangers, check out thefirstregiment.com. We're going to be having meetings soon, in-person meetings. So you check that out. Would definitely love to have you join the regiment.
Excellent. That's kind of like, so to expand on that, it's, like the cohort I have in San Diego, you've got these like elite fan group, right? That, And
Gold Diggers down there in NOLA.
Yeah, exactly. And I love this about the American rugby culture that's developing. The Roosters, of course. Yeah. Like, I like how Scott's like, why wouldn't you say the one that I'm on every week?
Just because we know it would irritate you if we didn't.
This is one of the unique things that is starting to emerge in American rugby culture, and I love to hear another version of it popping up for the Free Jacks. So, again, thanks for being one of those great fans. Thanks for being one of the pioneers out there in a new rugby community that is embracing Major League Rugby and also moving to a new home, as you said, Fort Quincy, potentially the new venue for the upcoming season for the Free Jacks. So, Phil, again, thanks for being such a great super fan and joining us here on the Rugby Rant podcast show. And make sure you go check out his show. And, of course, you can see us each and every week on the Rugby Network. And you can follow us online under the handle at Rugby Rant Pod for more great content, whether it be the Run, Pass, or Kick interviews, which take place every Monday at 8 p.m. CST. You can catch us again under the handle at Rugby Rant Pod on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, wherever you may find us. We will be there sharing more great news about Major League Rugby, USA Rugby, Rugby Canada, and everything between, because we aim to help grow rugby one fan at a time. My name is Ty Braga, your host for today's activities, alongside my colleagues Rob Hammerschmidt and Scott Ferrara. And on behalf of Phil Harris, we say thank you for watching another episode of the Rugby Rant podcast show. I was so close. Beep. Rugby Rant podcast show. Hey there, rugby fans. Again, welcome back to the Rugby Rant podcast show for our second half action. And this time we're going to be talking about our power rankings MLR edition. And here are the rules, gentlemen. You know that you each get 2 minutes to be able to rant, but more importantly, how are you going to do this one? Well, we're going to identify the top 3 picks from each conference, making up the best 6. These will be our predictions right now, as it stands, in your opinion, for the upcoming season, who may very well make it to the playoff rounds. So you can be, as a fan, following along with these choices based on what our experts have said. Remember, our show is 3 guys who think they know about rugby, so we might be completely wrong, and none of this will matter. Just like every other episode. However, we are going to give them the opportunity to tell us again their top 3 from the Eastern Conference and their top 3 power rankings from the West. To be able to kick it off, we hand it over to Rob Hammerschmidt. Take the floor.
Well, if we're going with power rankings just based upon last season, you obviously have to kind of think about where teams land at the end of last season. So I'm going to start in the East. I'm going to go first with Atlanta. Has to be amongst your top. They kind of floundered, if you will, in the final, but they ran up against a buzzsaw. Let's face it, we knew LA was going to be tough all year long. So I'm going to stick with LA on top. I'm going to bring Nola into the fold, of course. And yeah, I'm a homer, but we can't forget that they're going to get 3 important backs back into their fold. You're going to have Robbie Coleman back from knee injury. I'm told that he's going to be ready to come into the fold from the first week. You have Nick Feeks and you have Phil Eloff, and those are 3 very electric guys, each in their own way, and I think it'll really help shape that back line a bit. That was just starting to gel at the end of the season. And then Rooney, you can't discount them. A lot of Eagles on the team. Hanko was an absolute animal in both of the internationals involving Canada, so you got to like them. And I'm going to throw an honorable mention to Toronto. It's really hard to gauge them because they played everything out of country last year, but they sure had, I think 16 of their arrows were on Rugby Canada. They showed what they could do when they're back on home soil, and so look out for them. I wouldn't be surprised if they're able to bump one of those 3 out of position. In the West, I'm going to go, of course, with LA. Yes, Adam Ashley Cooper is in retirement, but he's going to come in as a coach. You still have some powerhouse players, guys like Billy Meeks, Goddard, some of that guys in the second and back row and front row. So I think you got some powerful guys, of course. And then I think Utah is going to be in the mix as well. They really showed how powerful and potent they could be, especially as the match draws to an end. And then lastly, I think San Diego is going to be there. I hear they got a signing that people are going to be surprised by. I won't let the cat out of the bag. Stay tuned to the Rugby Rant podcast. You might find that out sooner than you think. But the fact that they have they're going to lose Saul Muching, but of course Chris Robshaw's back, and they got a plethora of other studs that I think will bolster them as they get back in the friendly confines of Torero.
I'm confused, and I think you said like 8 names.
Yeah.
So I'm going to rewind a little bit and make sure I got it, because you mentioned a lot of good stuff and gave some really great backstory to some of them.
He essentially mentioned the whole league is what he did. He just
I mentioned ATL, Nola, Rooney. Toronto's an honorable mention, could supplant the other 2.
Oh,
then
Toronto's
LA,
honorable
Utah,
mention. Okay, so you're pulling the Scott tactic, which is 5 names and 15 honorable mentions.
It worked for him. It worked for
What
him,
are you
so it's got to
talking
work for me.
So let me recap. Your 6, you got LA, you got Nola, you got inside that 6 is Utah. Inside the 6 is Rooney and Atlanta, and ending with San Diego. Toronto was your honorable mention, which sits outside of that 6 that you would normally choose as your best picks for next season, right?
Yep.
All right. Sounds good. Sounds strong. I do like the honorable mention, by the way, for Toronto. Obviously, Toronto were dealt a lot harder deal than many teams, and I'm not trying to use it as an excuse for their end-of-season results. But they did have to be able to, just before, transplant their entire club, organization, staff, everything across to Atlanta for the 2021 season. However, if we go back to the truncated season of 2020, they went 4 out of 5 wins, and again, on the road, because they never had, in 2 years, they haven't even had a home game since, since the last 2 years. So, yeah, I think that overcoming the obstacles they had to and still perform at a high level, respect.
And by the way, OGDC lost Jason Robertson. He's going back to New Zealand. That was a linchpin for them, so I think they're going to struggle to find continuity of the back line.
You're right. I mean, there was a key player, right? And
so he's very another team. He's talking about other teams.
No, that's why they're out. That's why they're out.
Just name them all.
It's not difficult to figure out. No rocket science. No rocket science needed.
I'm just saying the only team you didn't talk about in the Eastern Conference is the damn Free Jacks. So I mean,
yeah, what's going on with that, Hammer?
I figured I'd leave some meat on the bone for you, my friend.
Okay, thanks. Appreciate it.
That's more like the scraps that you left there for the. So let's turn our attention to Scott, the big guy, Ferrari. He seems ready to rock and roll.
We're still cooking, and we're going back to Cali. So let's talk about the Western Conference. I'm talking about the Giltinis. I think they're going to have continuity. I think all their young guys are going to have more playing time now that some of these old heads are moving on and coaching or not coming back, things like that. San Diego, I think the problem with San Diego was their lack of continuity for home matches. Practice play. They were in Chula Vista, they were in Vegas, they were back at Torero, and I think they just couldn't find. If you can't find a home, I think that's a big issue in any sport. So I think they get back on track. And then the last one coming out of the Western Conference, I'm going with the new Dallas Jackals team. They're starting to set up some good teams there. I think they're going to be sneaky good. We saw AGs and SaberCats, tail off. AGs had a great defense. I want to say for 75% of their matches, but offensively couldn't find the firepower. I mean, if they find the firepower, maybe they step up. But I really think we're going with Dallas. Now let's talk about the Eastern Conference. I'm going with Atlanta, Rooney, and Toronto. And the reason I'm going with those three, Atlanta killing it on offense, putting the pedal to the metal. Rooney, again, they're getting back a core group of guys, a lot of them Eagles. Like the continuity is going to be there. And I just think Toronto, if you look at their standings at 5 wins and 11 losses, but look at the point differential for the entire season is a -1. That's the other team that had a lack of continuity for not being able to play home matches in their home country. So those are my 6.
I like it. Short and concise. So let's look over it again. LA. So interesting that you and Rob both agree on this point. We'll see how Phil feels about it. That was your number 1 pick in the West. Well, obviously, we can see by the record that they've already said that it's pretty much an easy yes. They won the league. They won their conference before that. They still have a great amount of players on contract that were there this past season that are most likely we can safely assume at least will still be there. And then also really great players that have kind of come into fruition and come into their own recently, like Christian Dyer, who has had a stellar appearance at the USA level that you hope to continue into the MLR next season. So a lot of growth potential there. Even though they got the experience, there's a lot of growth potential inside that team, and they have just typically been leading the way. San Diego, I like that choice. I honestly do, because I think that they're also one of those teams, much like we said for Toronto, had a lot of rough cards and rough deals handed to them in the past season that you couldn't really say it was the true San Diego, right? It was just too difficult an obstacle for them to change venues too often. Injuries. I mean, Rob Shaw, who was hailed as this, the marquee signing, never really got a run out, or at least very little time. And not by his fault of any of his own. It's just unfortunate that he got injured, right? But we know that he's coming back. We know he's got another shot. I wouldn't be surprised to be able to see another big push from them ahead of next season to be more talent, which has been their form just before. They're not afraid to be able to bring in former internationals from New Zealand and, of course, England, so we could expect more of the same. Jackals, interesting one. A lot of young talent. I mean, that's the one that kind of threw me off. That I'm surprised you said that. I'm not saying it's wrong.
This is the year one of the Texas teams is going to be in the playoff picture, and I think it's Dallas. I think some of the Houston players and Austin players are going to jump a little ship. I think Dallas is going to have a sneaky good roster, and you guys are going to see it. And talking about San Diego real quick, a negative 34 point differential, but the biggest thing is a -2 try differential. So most of those points were penalty points, but on tries against opponents it was only -2. So I think if you go by the analytics of it, that's why they're a stronger team going into 2022.
Right, and obviously there's only things can only get better because unfortunately, while it was a disappointing season, you have to be able to set that aside and go, okay, well, look, we can obviously improve upon that when we have these other things in place. So I think there's a lot of upside there. Jackals, we just don't know anything about them, so it's kind of hard to be able to figure that out just yet. And the signings they've had are young. We haven't seen any of those true marquee players being signed, and we don't know if they will. But I'm excited to be able to see them play some rugby. So throwing them in the mix, I'll give you a thumbs up for that because why not, right? Nobody can refute the point because no one's ever seen them play.
I don't take the easy ones, Ty. I don't take the easy ones like other people.
Right, no, but that's a safe bet because I can't argue it because I've never seen them play. So smart move too. Let's turn our attention to the East. Atlanta, familiar favorite. Of course, we know that they were the conference champions. I'm surprised you put them ahead of your Rooney, but that's how the scoreline ended up, and that's how your rankings ended up too. Rooney, of course, have just been a familiar favorite in those last and final stages. For whatever reason, they just don't have that little bit extra on the day that they need the most. But I think that, if the team stays largely the same as it was this season, which we expect it to be with a lot of the Eagles, especially in the Tide 5, that they could really build upon some of the successes of the past season. So I think that's a good, solid pick. And I love that you included Toronto as your third pick there for all the reasons I mentioned before. Solid round. And I think I like it because there's a couple of wild cards in there too, just to mix it up. Let's hand it over to Phil.
All right, gents, I got a bone to pick with Hammer and the big guy here. Not a lot of, jumping out on a limb, except for you, big guy, with the Jackals, which I think that's a terrible take. So let me just throw it out for the Eastern Conference, what I know the most, right? Stick to what you know. Atlanta at number 3. I have a lot of time for Scott Lawrence and what he's doing down there in Atlanta. The Eastern Conference winners from 2021 will be a strong team throughout the season, but may come just short of reaching the higher levels up the Eastern Conference ladder there. Continuity is a big thing, so we're expecting a lot of those guys to come back, and they're very good. A lot of physicality on that team, but my Jacks, the Free Jacks, of course, will be 70% of their roster is going to be retained per Tom Kindly, the performance director of the Free Jacks. He said that on my podcast a couple times already. I think the new head coach, Scott Matthew from South Africa, will live up to his nickname of the Giant Killer back home, doing more with less. I think our team, we're amazing at home, only losing one game. Fort Quincy behind me here is going to be a fortress, just like Fort Union Point was. I have a lot of time for this team. I think there will be a lot of physicality, a lot of work ethic, and competitiveness in this team that is being retained. And for my number one, kind of surprised, but Toronto, if they're back in their home base of the Great White North, they will have a talented team that can beat anybody in the East. A lot of people had Toronto as the Eastern Conference winners last year. Obviously, COVID threw a wrench into that, but I feel good about them. Moving it to the West, of course, LA, the Evil Empire, continues to live up to its name, thumbing their nose at the salary cap, potentially, and being basically a holding stall for the glue factory that is pro rugby. It's a team with the worst name in sports, unfortunately, dominating the competition. I bet old Gilly is on the phone right now to Kurtley Beale as we speak, trying to convince him to join LA's Evil Empire. Seattle, number 2. The Seawolves finally get back to their back-to-back championship form after a nightmarish 2021. They have great fans up there that's going to make that area a fortress once again in the Pacific Northwest. And then, well, that's a kind of a shocker, right? But then for third, I've got Houston. Okay, everybody's sleeping on Houston right now. But listen, their director of rugby, Ty, I'm sure this is a guy that you know very well, being a South African, is a proven winner. That ownership there has shown time and time again that they are in this thing for the long haul. They're the only team with a rugby-specific stadium. I think that they're going to make leaps and bounds this year with the talent that they bring in. And I want them to win. I'm no big fan of theirs by any means, but any team that is invested in a rugby-specific stadium in the United States, go. Make the playoffs. Do what you need to do. Best of luck.
Right. Yeah, here's another interesting picks from you guys. Man, you're making me think here. This is really nice. I like it because there's a little bit of variety, but the consistency is certainly mostly around LA. Every one of you listed as the first pick, top rank for the West. And it makes sense. We've already established that. Seattle, interesting one. I mean, Seattle obviously had a disappointing season last season, but I also think I want to say that they also had a pretty much underwhelming season for the first part of the 2020 season as well. So is this indicative of how rugby is growing at that level with MLR, that they're kind of just sticking to the same formula and it's just not quite enough anymore? Last season they made a really big point about continuing to be able to recruit players of the same level. They rehired their existing team, didn't bring much more new international experienced talent in. Instead, they brought in the draftees and they go on to build their program from the bottom up, and which I admire, but it doesn't always deliver results very quickly. And that's also what fans want, especially if they come to have the expectation of being winners. It's very tough pill to be able to swallow, to have 2 winning seasons followed by 2, for lack of a better term, underwhelming seasons. So that will be an interesting pick. It really does depend on what their recruiting is going to be like for next season, I think. And they've had a lot of inconsistency in coaching too. So I think that there's a few things in their corner that are not working in their favor. I like the Houston one though. Heineken Meyer, we were privileged to be able to have him on a show. And he is, of course, a World Cup level coach. Did successfully with South Africa and, of course, many other platforms across the rugby landscape. He is also one of those that is very hands-on. Rob and I and Scott all had the opportunity to be able to talk with him off camera, and he said he's going to be hands-on. He's there. He's not a consultant. He's not Zooming, conversations. He's not Skyping anybody. He's on the ground, boots on the ground, and so he's now starting to open up the pathway for many of the other people he trusts in rugby to join him at Houston. So it's going to be an interesting to see how that develops. I can see Rob is like wanting to jump in.
I thought about Houston too. Here's the thing. I think you're going to see them get better. I just think it's going to take a bit more time for Heineke to develop that culture that he can definitely create down there in Houston.
I mean, he's having to rebuild from zero, break it down to build it back up, and that takes time.
Right. And he's got some young guys to do it with. I think it's just going to take some time.
And you're talking about a team that had a negative 276 point differential, and the biggest part of that is a negative 49 try differential. So 95% of that differential was just because they were outscored via tries. So when you're looking at San Diego and you're saying that their try differential was -2 and their point differential was 34, their games were a lot closer, even though there was a lot of big
and let's not forget, they were also among the first to really challenge LA. Now, they came up short because they just didn't have the legs to be able to carry it through. But we already saw the impact one player had in their style with Boyer, right? Now, imagine you get 3 or 4 of these playmakers involved, which you have to recognize Heineken Meyer has the ability to spot these players. Like, he could see something in a player before most can. And, of course, his support staff will be pretty much of the same mindset because he's worked with these guys over different periods throughout his career. So it'll be interesting to see what can be achieved between now and next season because, to your point, Rob, yes, it's going to take time, but to the point of what the fan may expect and what the ownership may expect is if you're going to go out and spend a lot of money, you want to know that your investment is worthwhile. So they will want to see something, especially with 3 seasons, what is it now? Actually 4 seasons of very underwhelming ends to their season. I mean, Dan Power called them the perpetual underperformers of MLR. It's a tough title, but they've earned it over 4 seasons. So let's turn our attention to the other conference that Phil had mentioned. Atlanta, common theme through all of yours. You put it as your number 3 pick, though, which was interesting. The lowest rank out of them, out of this grouping so far, but yet came out the winners. So maybe you expect something to change or that rhythm to not continue into next season. Free Jacks, obviously, you got to put them there. They're in at number 2 is your pick. You cited one of the important points is that they're going to retain 70% of their squad. As long as you're over 50%, you still got some continuity, right?
Yes.
And I love this one again. I like these wild card picks because you just throw it out there. With Toronto, I love the way Toronto plays rugby. I do. I think it's exciting. I think it's running rugby, but it's high risk, in terms of last season really wasn't a good reflection. Let me rewind. Because they weren't really kind of playing to their true form. They had a lot of people that should have been there that weren't there, that were 4 months away from their families. Difficult. But when they were playing great rugby in 2020, they were on fire. Yes, they had a lot of their old squad, But the point I really wanted to be able to make when we talk about continuity, it's kind of been a similar theme running through all of this. They have all of their guys, 12 players that were brought into the Canadian national team squad that are continuing to play all the way through and will continue to until they rejoin the camp. And they're still playing rugby now in Canada for the Toronto the rugby rally, right? So they're still playing rugby now as the Toronto Arrows. So they're keeping that momentum going. They're doing a great job. And they're keeping that team together. So the continuity is going to be unbelievable. They're going to have even more opportunity to build upon that platform because they've never stopped going, right? Whereas other teams have had to stop for this traditional break. And they've just kept going because they wanted to be able to provide rugby for their fans in Toronto. So they're all really good picks. I mean, I got to ask myself now, who's going to be the winner of this round? And it's a very difficult one to be able to establish. But before then, do you guys have any comments about somebody else's picks?
I just want to say that nobody else picked the Free Jacks, and I think that's pretty abysmal and embarrassing on your guys' part. Can't wait to see them come into the playoffs and beat your respective teams if they make it.
Right. Wait for the Super Brute contest, the next one, all right? And we'll see who gets the best picks.
Yeah, I would say this. Look, Nola, Rooney, and ATL all had a round robin where they beat each other twice. Right. Nola beat Rooney twice. ATL beat Nola twice. Rooney beat ATL twice. And so, with that kind of parity, it's really hard to discount any of the three. Of course, like I said, Toronto is the wild card because they'll be at home next year and they'll have their playing in front of their fans. So it's hard to say. But again, I think things are looking up for them. But
yeah, well, we hope so. I hope that they'll get to play at home, right?
I got word that there's going to be some changes in NOLA too, a little bit of changes in NOLA that I think are going to be beneficial to their offense.
Yeah, of course, right? I mean, we always want to be able to kind of see there's going to be coaching changes, there's going to be player changes, there's going to be players coming and going. In now, this period, it's going to get exciting because I think from this week, all the teams are going to start rolling out their announcements of who has been signed, who is re-signed for the next season. And we're going to get to be able to see the framework of what their teams might look like. However, we will only know for sure once teams assemble, which I believe is late November or December. Correct me if I'm wrong. They will, of course, take a break over the holidays, but the assumption is that there'll be boots on the ground, especially the international players. They'll come in as early as they can because they might have further restrictions. But yeah, I mean, we could see what these teams might look like as early as November, and that's exciting, right? So let's draw our attention to who is going to be our winner. And it might have flown a little bit under the radar, but I did take note that this person put in a little bit more effort that in some areas that stood out for me, and it works into something that I enjoy when backing the facts, is the stats. So I'm going to hand this one over to Scott. Look at the smile on his face. He knew it was coming his way.
Yet again, another win. I tell you guys all the time, Rob doesn't really know what he's talking about. I mean, it's
Right.
plain simple. I wake up in the morning and I piss excellence. It's another win for the big guy.
Right.
And you steal lines from other shows too. So
Yeah, exactly.
congratulations.
Popular shows.
He makes it so easy to root
Movies.
against him, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Listen, come at me when you win a couple. Phil, I mean, come at me when you win a
just
couple.
did.
Last time, don't you remember? Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. You didn't make the playoffs. That's right. Oh.
Have you won a Shield? No. What are you
No.
talking
Oh,
about?
make the playoffs. Make the playoffs. You weren't even close. You weren't even runner-up. Rob's team was runner-up to make the playoffs. So if we had the original playoff schedule, you still wouldn't have made it.
Okay.
And this is why we do this show. So I want to be able to remind our viewers that, of course, what we do here is all just for the fun of it. We hope to be able to engage an audience who want to learn more about rugby. And, of course, for the more avid fan, we kind of dive into some great points you may agree with, you may disagree with, and whatever it may be, you want to be able to share your thoughts. You could do so by commenting on our feed on social media under the handle @RugbyRantPod. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Everybody except one person, we know who that is. That being said, we encourage to be able to help us grow rugby one fan at a time. Is it only landing now, gentlemen?
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And by the way, folks, if you have topics or things you want us to cover, please let us know. We, of course, in order to grow rugby, we want to engage fans. And so the more ideas about what you would like to see on the show as a topic of conversation.
And listen, don't join in. Don't just give a topic. Say, I want to be a ranter because I want to talk about this topic.
I like Phil. Phil's come through twice now for us. It's been awesome.
Yeah, exactly that, right? And it's because of efforts like Phil, who's, going the extra mile to engage his rugby community, to be able to build a fan base, that we all get to be able to enjoy rugby at a higher and greater level. But it takes time, and no contribution is too small. Join us on the show. Take on Scott. Take on Rob. We'd love to be able to do this because that's what it's for. It's for you as the fans. Our motto, our mission is to be able to help grow rugby one fan at a time. And that could be you. So follow us on social media under the handle @RugbyRantPod. Alternatively, you can also find us each and every week, every Friday, with a new rugby debate episode on the Rugby Network. And again, you could see us on Run, Pass, or Kick interviews, where we interview another rugby insider every Monday at 8 p.m. For this episode, as we do for every one before, we like to be able to hand it over to our guests for a final thought. Anything that you wanted to be able to share, a special message, tell our fans here and now what that might be.
Hey, appreciate you guys having me on. This has been awesome, of course. Rooney sucks. Huzzah, Free Jacks, go win it all this year. Put everybody to shame, and these picks will be completely meaningless if the Free Jacks go and win the whole thing next season. Hoping for that, of course. And check us out at jacksrangers.com.
Actually, it won't be meaningless because we will note and remind everybody that you picked them at number 2.
That's the minimum expectation in my mind is to get to the playoffs and then see what happens. That's all. That's what I think.
And that's pretty much the formula, I think, for every team is get to the playoffs and figure it out from there, right? Because you only then know who your opponents will be and the strength of them on the day. And talking about on the day, that winner is for today, Scott Ferrara. And he is obviously super proud one more time, but you can take him on next week by letting us know whether you'd like to be a ranter on the Rugby Rant podcast show. On behalf of the team, my name is Ty Braga. You have Rob Hammerschmidt and Scott Ferrara, and of course, Phil Harris from Jacks Rangers. Thank you for watching another great episode of the Rugby Rant podcast show, and we will see you at